Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Darnise, and thank you for joining me for another episode here. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. The channel is growing. I am trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and we're almost there. So if you know people who would be interested in this kind of content, do share and ask them to subscribe, like the videos, all that kind of good stuff. Well, so much has been going on in our news, in our world lately, and I haven't had much time to come on here and, talk about them. As a matter of fact, you may notice that the video I just uploaded the video. I didn't even, edit it in any way. I just need to get it out and not really worry about all that. So I hope you'll bear with me. But so many things I wanted to reflect upon with you all. It's been happening. We live in times now where everything is coming undone, or at least seemingly. So many things are happening. There's such a shift happening in our consciousness. We are, as a human race, being propelled very quickly through levels of consciousness. And some of us are resisting mightily. And that's why we have such upheaval, right? Like our institutions are literally failing right around us. The ground is shifting. We look at our presidential administration here in the U.S. We are outraged probably on a daily basis, definitely weekly basis, if not daily basis, at the things that we see happening in our world and in our country in particular. But, I'd like to say that these things are for our good. And they can be, depending on what we do next as a human race, because we are shifting and we are elevating, we are moving into the fourth and fifth dimensions of consciousness, and not everything can go. Not everything can vibrate at that level and make it. And so we're seeing a great resistance. And so all of the things that we see that are, kind of crazy, just keep in mind, we're going someplace with all of this, and it's up to us as a human race to decide who we're going to be. Anyway, one of the things that's happening that's, been on the news a lot is the fact that the cathedral at Notre caught on fire, right? There's so much to be said about this. There's so much symbolism in one of the major cathedrals of Catholicism / institutional religion. The fact that that cathedral could catch on fire. I mean, I don't even know if they have any idea how it caught on fire. It's just on fire, right? And so again, it's one of those things that you think cannot happen. So many of our institutions have fallen that we would never have imagined could happen. If you think back a few years when our banking system failed, our real estate market fell, our car manufacturing industry had to be bailed out. Our farmers had to be bailed out by the government. And these things were considered to be too big to fail. We never really thought of these huge, what we thought of stable institutions falling. We know institutional religion has also started to crumble. People are just not really having it anymore with these institutional religions, and that's across the board. So I don't mean Catholicism only, but it's definitely included. The church has so many scandals going on with it in terms of these sex abuse scandals and priests. The fact that not only has it been going on, but the administration of the church, the other clerics have, ignored it to a large degree. All of these things are weighing down on the church, and definitely people's, respect for the churches have just gone by the wayside, or going on a daily basis by the wayside. So then when we think a cathedral of iconic stature and status like Notre Dame, right? Like this has been standing, I think, for centuries. I don't know, the 13th century or something. For centuries. And for it to be I mean, it didn't burn to the ground, but for it to even catch on fire and for so much of it to be lost is a huge, almost literal red flag for us as a human race to say, who are you? What are you doing? What are you about? This thing is literally crumbling in front of you. Everything that you've known is crumbling. The institutions have to be reworked. There's a book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die, and it was written many years ago, I'm going to say in the 80s, by John Shelby Spong, possibly, I don't think in the 70s, I think in the 1980s it came out, written by a bishop in the Episcopalian tradition. His name again, John Shelby Spong, S-P-O-N-G. You could look up his books on Amazon or wherever and find he had a whole lot of books. And he wrote, Christianity has to change or it will die out. And we're looking at that, right? We're looking at so many ways in which the churches have failed, are failing, and they will have to change or they will absolutely die out and be replaced with something else. I believe that humans always need some kind of system for creating meaning. So we'll create something else. It might also be a type of religion. But the church as we've known it, those are going by the wayside. And again, I'm using the term generically, so I don't just mean the Catholic Church or Christian. Generally, I mean even, Islam, Judaism, all of these things that we think of as stable traditions are going. And that fire at Notre Dame is screaming at us. This is going away. Now we've had all these people, these very wealthy people, come out of the woodwork to say that they're going to invest in rebuilding. Well, okay, but again, it must change or die. And the fact that there's a fire to destroy part of it means that it's already changing, right? It's already changing. These institutions can no longer hold sway. So even if it is rebuilt, it won't be the same that it ever was, right? So, that's one thing that's been happening. Crazy. I mean, I could go on about maybe I will go on a little bit more about it. But, if we think about, if we even take the position of like the sins of the father kind of thing, the things that the Catholic Church in particular has done through colonialism. And if we think about, the colonialism, enslavement, the exploitation of the poor, there's a time of reckoning happening. And so Catholicism is under great fire right now, literally and figuratively under fire. And so for that cathedral to catch on fire is, like I said, it's a literal red flag. So, we could say, well, the church has committed a great deal of sin against humanity in so many ways. And this is one of the ways that now there's a reckoning. There's not going to be, what should we call it? A demon come up out of the earth and with a pitchfork and horns and torment people. That's not what it's going to be, right? We're seeing what the destruction or the downfall or the reckoning. We're seeing what that looks like without having the need for some figure called Satan. We don't even need that. Things are just going by the wayside. So there are many ways to look at that fire. There about, the symbolism there, the time for change, the fact that it came by fire. James Baldwin is one of my absolute famous authors. Hopefully you know James Baldwin because he's the great Baldwin. And so he wrote a book called The Fire Next Time. And if you haven't read it, put it on your list. You must read it. It's only this big. If you're like, I don't have time to read a book, it's only this big. As a matter of fact, you can find it on YouTube in audio form. Other people have already created an audio book for you. It's available for free on YouTube. But I suggest reading. Of course I do. I'm a professor. But James Baldwin was one of the greatest writers ever. Literally one of the greatest writers ever. And he wrote an essay called The Fire Next Time. And in it, he says he uses this allegory from the Bible, right? When after the flood with Noah, and God saved Noah and the remnant of people, right? And so up in the sky, Noah sees a rainbow. And the rainbow is to signify God's covenant with humanity, where God says, I won't destroy the world again. But what's important, the fine print is, God says, I won't destroy the world again by water, the fire next time. And so Baldwin writes this book about the state of Black America, and he was writing this in the late 60s. And so everything that he wrote could be absolutely written today in 2019. So when he talked about the fire next time, he's telling America, really white America, that if you don't deal with the sin that is racism, there will be a reckoning, and it will be the fire next time. You won't get a pass. Nobody gets a pass when there are great sins against humanity involved. No one gets a pass. And so America, you cannot avoid, you cannot put your head in the sand, you cannot act like white supremacy doesn't exist. If you try to, there'll be that reckoning, which is the fire next time. So I definitely recommend Baldwin in all cases, but in particular, the fire next time. Again, very relevant, especially for Americans. Anyway, that part of the video went long. This is going to be a long video. It's going to be long because, as I said, I haven't had a chance to come on here and make something in a minute, and I had all these things that I want to get back to about. Secondly, it was Nipsey Hussle's death and funeral. And by now, because I'm late to talk about it on here, right? By now, you've probably seen the footage. Maybe you've seen his mother, Angelique Smith is her name. Maybe you've seen the footage of his mother where she poured libations to the ancestors. If not, go on YouTube, right? You can find everything on YouTube, and you can watch that. So when she goes up at Nipsey Hussle's memorial here in LA at the Staples Center, her first thing to do is to recognize and honor the ancestors. And as you know, if you've been watching my videos at all, you know that I am big on that as an African traditional practice. In your spirituality, the first thing that you're going to do is acknowledge your ancestors. And that's what she does. She goes up and she steps to the lectern and she says, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the ancestors, and she pours libations to them. And then she goes on to talk about her son and how she felt within her that something was off, something was wrong. It's like she had a feeling, a premonition, or we might say a bad omen, that something was off, something was wrong, and there was going to be some great event coming into her life. She said she felt that, and so when she got the message that her son had been murdered, she goes, that's what it is. And here's a woman who's very spiritual, who belongs to a community here, which I just found out, belongs to a community here in Los Angeles that is an African-centered church that teaches about ancient African civilizations, which I talked about in my last video. But, clearly she's somebody who puts her spirituality first, who honors the ancestors, honors the traditions of African traditional practices. And so I thought, wow, look at what we're seeing. And that funeral was broadcast. It was a huge thing here in LA, the likes of which I don't think we've seen, in terms of a public funeral, I don't think we've seen since Michael Jackson's funeral. I mean, processions through the street all the way downtown to the Staples Center, and just an enormous outpouring for this man, Nipsey Hussle. A young man trying to do good. I mean, not just trying, he was doing good. I hate when people say, his life was cut short and he didn't get to do this or this or this. He did. he embodied a lot. He was already doing it, so let's make sure we give him his respect and his props that he was doing it. He was not almost doing it. He was not kind of doing it. He was living his message, and he was being a great example, not only for his own children but for us as well. And I don't miss the irony that he was 33 at his death, and so Jesus, as you know or have heard, was killed at 33. And anyway, that's a whole nother video. You see, I have so much. It's a whole nother video. But following that funeral coverage and the recognizing of the ancestors by his mother, I certainly saw some pushback from Christians who were like, oh my gosh, she's praying to the dead. This is their misperception based upon the narrow confines of Christianity. They could not see the wealth in another spiritual practice. They looked at that as something evil or bad because Christianity's had such a hold on us, right? And so black people looking at that couldn't see it. They were just like, oh, she's praying to the dead, and that's forbidden, and the Bible tells us that we can't do that. That's satanic. And I thought, isn't it interesting? Here come, those type of Christians to come and criticize an African practice. And that's a colonial mindset that Christianity brought with it. And, I'll leave it to you to figure out for yourselves if you can be both Christian and honor your African roots as well. Some people try to do it. I think, it is possible, but, you have to be mindful. You have to be conscious about what you're doing, and maybe not so centered on Jesus of Nazareth per se, but more on the Christ consciousness and understanding the idea in African traditional religions and spiritualities about, a higher power, consciousness that goes beyond any human personality, put it that way. So Christ consciousness is broader, more expansive than the man Jesus. And if you can keep that in mind, you can do that. You can weigh that. You can carry both things, even though they seem maybe contradictory. Anyway, also at Nipsey Hussle's funeral was Louis Farrakhan, Brother Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. And I thought that's a very interesting addition, because here we are seeing the multiplicity of the way African Americans do religion, right? It's just golden, right? Here's a practice of Christianity, of Orthodox, Ethiopian, Coptic, Eritrean Orthodoxy, and the Nation of Islam, something that is, uniquely American, as a form of Islam that is uniquely African American, actually. And so to have Louis Farrakhan speaking, I thought this just represents the way Black Americans do religion. Like, we've always mixed it. We've always mixed it in terms of what serves us most. So there's that. And the last thing, I appreciate if you have hung in with me this far. And remember to if you like these kind of teachings and reflections, remember to like the video and, share and subscribe. It's almost Easter. It is a Saturday before Easter right now. Holy Saturday, some would call it, the time where people go and have Easter Vigil. Sometimes people start it a little early, meaning, Saturday early evening. Saturday Easter Vigil is the lead up to the resurrection. And so if you're starting, 8, 9 o'clock on Saturday, you got a long haul to dawn. So, some say Easter Vigil really should not be done until, getting close to dawn, or at least after midnight. Keeping watch, so to speak, for the resurrected Christ. And in Christianity, so the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But for those who do Christianity more broadly, the resurrection or the return of Christ consciousness, right? The idea that God has once again risen, or the consciousness about God has, we're being reminded of it. We could put it that way. But that brings me to my point about Easter. So Easter again, y'all. And, that is, it's a mixed holiday. For Christians, it is the high holy day. It is the day that signifies the importance of the entire religion of Christianity. It is the resurrection of Jesus, right? And if you are a Christian, there's nothing greater. I mean, Christmas Day, the birth of Jesus, one could say, but the scripture, the New Testament Christian scripture says, if Christ be not risen, then my faith be in vain. So Christianity is really about recognizing the rise from the dead of Jesus for the remission of sin. If you're a Christian, that's how you understand Jesus and the resurrection. So this very high holy day is so thoroughly mixed with pagan tradition still. And I say pagan not in a negative way. I just mean non-Christian, before Christian. So the holiest of Christian holidays is still practiced in such a way that it's thoroughly infused with non-Christian ritual. And they could never get rid of it. The Christians could never get rid of it as Christianity spread through Europe. They could never get away, or even through the Mediterranean. They could never get people to stop practicing these spring equinox traditions of people all over the world. People all over the world have traditions that recognize the spring equinox, the rebirth of spring, the resurrection of life after the winter. That's what Easter really is, right? It is the resurrecting of nature. And so those religions that have honored nature, recognizing the cycles of nature and of the earth, of course this is something to celebrate when you've been through a long, dark, cold winter where everything in nature seems to die, and now here in the spring equinox, things come back to life, literally. There's a resurrection. And so the practices that we recognize in Easter, like the eggs, the egg hunt, the Easter eggs and the bunnies, those are fertility rituals, right? Like, what could be more of a fertility object than an egg? Like, people talk about rabbits being fertile, right? Because they really are symbols of fertility. And our Easter practices are full. That's what people do on Easter Sunday, right? They go to church. They then have an Easter egg hunt after they have painted the eggs in, bright colors, and then they hide them, and then they go and find them. And so we give each other Easter baskets with eggs and chocolate rabbits in it. We are performing fertility rituals, whether we know it or not. We are. Going back to well before Christianity, the traditions around the Assyrian and the Babylonian traditions of Ishtar. I mean, you can Google any of this and look it up for yourselves, but the Assyrian and the Babylonian, and so if somebody acquainted with the Bible, the Assyrians and the Babylonians are written in the text because they're the ones who are considered godless or pagan in comparison to the Jews of the time. So, we have a record of them and what they practiced. And the Jews are all the time talking about how they're not good, God-fearing people. Well, what they were doing are things like recognizing nature. And so Ishtar was one of the goddesses, and she was associated with fertility and eggs and rabbits. Honest, this is the truth. And then coming forward in time from that period, we can just look at European pre-Christian history. You look up Ostara. She was, they say, from the Germanic peoples, but it doesn't even matter which one in particular you pick, because all through Europe you had fertility goddesses, all through the Mediterranean, all over Africa, all over the world. You have a recognition some goddess or god of fertility. And so the idea of a resurrecting God is not entirely original or unique. I mean, we could look at Osiris from the Egyptian, right? So I've spoken to you about Aser and Aset and Heru, and so who we got to know as Osiris was a dying god who was then resurrected. So none of these things are really unique. Christianity is known to have borrowed heavily from Judaism and Christianity, from the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Africans. Of course they would, because it's the cultures bounced off of each other, right? The cultures met each other when people traveled, and stories got shared and blended. You can't help it. People like to say that, they have a pure religion or their culture is pure. There's no such thing. Once people start interacting, you're going to have intermarriage, you're going to have multiracial babies, you're going to have the crossing and the melding of religion and culture. It's always the way, it's always going to be the way, as long as there's more than one culture on the planet. So, this thing we call Easter is a mix. It is very clearly a mix of pre-Christian and Christian religious practices. And I, for one, don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just the way things are, as I just said. But it's people who like to pretend like, oh, Christianity is unique and special, and Jesus is the only way. I'm like, well, there's stories that have been told like this well before Jesus of Nazareth walked around on the planet. And so I think I'm going to let it go here. This video, I don't even know how long it is at this point, y'all. But I appreciate you once again for hanging in. I'd appreciate any of your comments. And let me know about any of these things that I've said, any comments or thoughts that you had. I'd love to, pick up on it and possibly a part 2 of the video and, talk some more about it. But let me know what parts of it that resonate with you. And I'm going to just say bye for now.